Okay, good evening, folks. It's time for us to begin. We've got just 2 more classes left in this quarter for Bible warfare. And again, I hope that you've enjoyed studying with me as we've attempted to answer some of the questions that people may ask us, where we can better answer those questions, but also better evangelize to people that we know. I want to just remind you, I think I've tried to do this throughout the quarter, and I know I spent an entire class time talking about this, but remember that these things that we are talking about and the way that we're approaching this is not to provide ammo for us to just fight and argue with people. That's not what we want to do. That is not an effective way of evangelizing. It will actually drive people away, especially I think in today's culture more than anything. You know, back in the day, they used to have debates. They would gather people together, thousands of people sometimes in attendance to listen to 2 men debate a specific topic. We don't see that very often nowadays. It still happens some.
You might hurt somebody's feelings.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is somebody's feelings might get hurt through all that. But I think it's a good way. I think it might be a way to do something different. It might be a way to reach people. I don't think it's a bad way if it's approached correctly. But we're not trying to argue with people. We're not looking for a way to tear them down or anything like that. We are looking for a way to engage with them in a topical discussion that's going to point right back to the text. Matter of fact, when we went through this, we talked about some rules of engagement. And the first one is just to understand that however someone else may believe is something that they're very sincere in. They truly believe this. They're invested in it. And for us to discount that or to say that they're delusional, I think would drive them away more than bringing them closer to understanding what the truth is. And then the number 2 rule is to always look for opportunities just to get back into the scriptures. Go to the text. Too many times we say, well, you know, hey, this is what I believe, or this is what I understand, or my opinion. I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing to say. I know that when I'm studying with people, I try to avoid saying the words, well, this is just what I believe, or this is my opinion. I say, let's see what the scriptures say. Let's just see what the scriptures say. And pointing it back to the text is your best avenue to take. And then the last one is always remembering to take your time. Usually when you're talking to somebody, don't feel like you've got to exhaustively cover that topic with them in every single detail. You don't have to tell everybody when you're talking about biblical topics everything that you know about that biblical topic all at once. I think it actually can show arrogance and show your ignorance. That really you think that you can unload on them everything that you know and it's going to be effective. You're way better off taking your time with that. Now, I know there's some circumstances where I have studied with someone knowing that I've got a very limited amount of time, and therefore I might go a little bit faster because I want to reach them and I don't want to waste any time at all. I may realize that this is my only chance to talk to this person. But you also have to keep in mind that you might be the person that's just planting the seed, and God may already have somebody else in mind to come along and water that. Whatever the case is, God is the one that gives the increase. And so there's nothing wrong with taking your time with those things. I just wanted to remind you of those rules that I've tried to establish. These are some 3 rules that I try to remember when I'm talking to people about the scriptures in a more informal way. If I have a Bible study that's set up maybe on a weekly basis and we're studying through the text and I'm trying to teach them about the church and about salvation, those kinds of things, I don't necessarily follow exactly these rules. Now, I do go to the scriptures every single time, and I do know that they're sincere, but I certainly have more things that try to cover. But if I'm just talking to people in regular conversation, I'm going to try to keep these things in my mind so that I can be effective in that way. All right? Okay, so tonight in Bible Warfare, we're actually going to look at, I've prepared 3 questions for us to do, and typically in this quarter, we have just shouted out a number and we go with it. I guess we could do the same thing again, but I don't have pieces of paper this time because I definitely want to cover these. Next week is going to be even more different. It's going to be more of a lightning round where the previous questions that we've looked at we've gone into a lot of detail, I think, with some of them. And then other ones we've maybe gone a little bit faster. Well, next week is going to be the lightning round. We're going to hit them. And I want to encourage you to come up with some questions, and we can answer them or attempt to on the fly next week. And if you want to, you can text me throughout this week. You've got 1 week to do so. A question that you would like for us to investigate next week. Then I'm open to that as well, and we'll go from there. All right? Any questions or anything before we get to, or comments before we get into these questions tonight? Y'all are all just chomping at the bit to find out what we're going to look at, aren't you? Okay, let's talk about this question here. This is one that's been on the list since day one, and one that I see quite often. Is there going to be an apocalypse/rapture? That's a question. Has anybody ever had somebody ask you that question or discussed this with people? See, yeah, it's a common one. Very, very common, a matter of fact. A lot of our friends in denominations are going to have certain views about the apocalypse and about the rapture, and I think that we need to be prepared to be able to have a conversation with them about this. What does that mean? The word apocalypse, I don't think in what I prepared, I don't think I had that down exactly defining that. The word apocalypse is really just means revealing or revelation. The word for revelation, for the book of Revelation, is the word apocalypto. It's a word that means a revealing, to uncover. And so sometimes we think of the apocalypse and immediately we think the zombie apocalypse, right? And we think about the end of times. Well, really, I can understand that word being used to describe the end of times because in some sense it will be a revealing, won't it? In some sense, the things that we don't know about, the things that we're unsure about how things are going to play out, will be all revealed, and everybody. Matter of fact, Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2 that, I think it's verse 10 and 11, that there is coming a day. He actually uses the word will 2 different times. The people will confess Jesus as Lord, and everyone will bow their knees before him. Those are things that we know are going to happen at the end of times. And at that time, what's interesting about that text specifically in Philippians is that he says that the people that are on the earth, in heaven, on the earth, and under the earth will all do these things, confess Jesus, and will all bow before him. And the idea is that people that have died and are in heaven bow, confess. People that are here on earth when Jesus comes back are going to bow and confess. And people that are even in torment, people who are in punishment right now, are going to do the same thing. And what that tells us is that it doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not. One day, every single person is a believer. Every single person. One day, if Jesus was to come back right now, all the people that didn't believe in God immediately believe in God. That's a revealing. And it's revealed to all those people that that didn't believe. So that I can understand that idea of apocalypse and being a revealing, but we don't need to be afraid of that at all. We don't need to be afraid of it. The word rapture, I know, is in my notes here. The word rapture, it's actually a Latin word. The word is not found in the English Bible. The word rapture. Now think about that just for a minute. Think about all your Christian friends or your friends who believe in Jesus, all those people who say that they're Christians that say there's going to be a rapture will not be able to find that terminology in the scriptures. So if you say, well, show me the rapture, that word is not used. Now, the word rapitus is actually found in the Latin Vulgate, the Latin version, AD, the Vulgate was a translation that Jerome did in about the 4th century AD, and the Catholic Church adopted that as the official text of the Bible. But that word is used as a Greek word, harpazo, and that word is found in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where it says, "Then we who are alive will be caught up." That's the word right there. "Together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord," is what Paul writes. The word "caught up." The usage today for rapture is generally this belief that there will be people who are all of a sudden missing. That's the belief today. Have you heard people talk? Have you seen those bumper stickers? Maybe you've seen that. I don't know if anybody puts bumper stickers on their cars anymore. Most cars hardly even have a bumper to put it on, right? But you may have seen this, or at least heard of it, that in case the rapture occurs, this vehicle will be empty. That the idea is that this person believes that they're a Christian, and that when Jesus comes again to bring Christians into heaven, that they're going, and that car and everything else remains on earth as is. That car would be driverless. And that's an interesting thought, but yet I can't find that in the scriptures. Now we're going to talk about some things that where they've gotten this in just a little bit. Here's what they believe, and you can interject if you've heard some of these things before. Things that they believe about the kingdom. First of all, they believe that when Jesus came the first time, okay, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14 says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld His glory, the glory of the only begotten. So when Jesus came and was living among humans to establish His kingdom, remember He's preaching His kingdom will be established, and He's talking about this kingdom. And His disciples knew about this kingdom, but they are thinking that it's going to be a physical kingdom. Well, these people believe that Jesus failed in establishing his kingdom in the first coming, and that He will succeed at His second coming. Okay? Does anybody have a problem with that belief? What are your thoughts when you hear that Jesus failed the first time? What do you think? Okay, all right. That's the biggest problem I have with this, is that I don't see any indication that the Son of God would do something and it not be perfect. I have a big problem with
Wiping
that.
out all of the competition to win is the furthest thing away from what he does.
Exactly. When Jesus does something, when He heals somebody, let's take somebody that was blind. When they can see, do you think they had 20/20 vision? I mean, they didn't measure 20/20 vision back in that day the way we do today. But do you think that they still needed or would need corrective lenses? Or do you think that when he heals somebody's eyes, they can see like they've never seen before and can see perfectly? I would think so. When Jesus causes somebody who has never walked before, or when a miracle takes place, Peter and John at the gate called Beautiful in Acts chapter 3, they heal a man who had never walked before, and you think that when he got up, and the way that Luke describes it, he gets up immediately. Do you think he had any kind of a limp going on? I don't think so.
He was sleeping.
Yeah.
He was leaping.
Yeah, he was leaping with joy because of what has happened to him. That's the God that I know. When he does something, he's done it perfectly. I just can't imagine Jesus coming and he's going to establish his kingdom and then man gets in the way of that. If I was having a conversation with somebody and they told me, yeah, when Jesus came, he failed and he didn't do it. It didn't work out. Satan got in the way, man got in the way, however you see it. Immediately I'd say, give me another example where Jesus does something and it fails. I just can't imagine that. That's exactly what I would talk about. All right, what they believe about, people that believe in the rapture, what they believe about the church is they view the church and Israel as two distinct entities with individual redemptive plans. Okay, so that's why you'll hear a lot of people that believe in the rapture talk about the salvation of Israel and how important it is for America to be political allies with Israel, because when Jesus comes back, he's going to establish this new kingdom in Israel and sit on the physical throne of David. And so we need to be allies with Israel if we want to be on the side of Jesus, political allies with Israel, the nation of Israel. Listen, folks, we've had political leaders, presidents of the United States that believe that. That's not taught in the scriptures. Not taught in the scriptures. Listen, this is not a political discussion, but I'm good with us being allies with Israel, but not because of religious purposes. I think it's good for us to be allies with Israel because we want to be good to people. We want to protect people's rights. We want to establish freedom and democracy. I think that's a good way of life, but not because Jesus is coming back and we want to be political allies with where Jesus is going to be. It's not for religious purposes. And so that's an interesting thing. They also believe in, this is when it gets really wonky, and we don't have enough time to go into a lot of detail about this, but I'm just going to give you some details about it. They believe in a tribulation, a 7-year period of time that's based upon this scripture from Daniel chapter 9, that is talking about the 70th, is that right? 70th week in Daniel chapter 9, talking about the Antichrist and that this 7-year tribulation is going to come just right before a 1,000-year reign, restoring Jews to Israel and bringing in all those that have fallen away from Israel back into the fold and establishing this remnant, and this temple is going to be rebuilt. The priesthood would be all reestablished, and all the sacrifices of the old law would be reestablished at that time. A 1,000-year reign. You've probably heard people talk about that before. The rapture is the idea that the church, people who are Christians, both living and dead, would be caught up and meet the Lord in the air at the beginning of this tribulation time period. Or some of them, depending on their brand of premillennialism. They'll believe that what might happen in the middle of that 7-year period, or even at the end of a 7-year period of tribulation. It just depends on how they may believe about that. But that tribulation would come, and then at the end of that, that's when this 1,000-year reign would happen, the millennium. Christ is going to return after that 7 years. They've been raptured up. Christians have been raptured up. Then everybody's got 7 years of hard times to get their life right before Jesus comes back. That would make it the third time that he comes. That would make it the third time. And at the end of that tribulation, he would establish a 1,000-year rule in New Jerusalem, in this holy city, physical Jerusalem. They believe that there's 144,000 Jews that will survive and go on and populate the earth during this time. Those who are raptured or raised previous to the tribulation period will reign with Christ over that 1,000-year time period. I have a big problem with that. There's nowhere in the scriptures that say that Jesus will ever set foot on earth again. Not one place. Matter of fact, it says that we would be caught up in the air, meet him in the air. And that he's got a place for us. We sing the song, I'll Fly Away, right? There's no reason for Jesus to come and reign on a physical throne for 1,000 years. After that 1,000 years, it's post-millennium, Satan would be bound during that 1,000-year reign. Satan would be bound, and Christ would reign, and Satan would be loosed to rule other nations, gather an army of the deceived, and take up a battle up against the Lord in what they would call the battle of what? Armageddon. You've heard this. You know these things. After that time period of Jesus' reign, Satan and Jesus create these armies to make this final battle at the end of this 1,000 years. And the way that the cards fall will determine who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. This view of millennialism or premillennialism is very, very popular today. Very, very popular. You'll see it everywhere. It really got popular around the 1970s, and I think in the 90s. You remember that Left Behind series that came out? You may remember that. There are books and even movies that came out that promoted this kind of teaching. And it made millions of dollars teaching this, but nowhere in the scriptures. So let's talk about what does the scriptures say about the end of times. Okay? I want to share with you 2 passages that say what happens at the end of time. There's so much. It's really hard to pick what I was going to look at, but I want to show you 2 at least. And these are the passages that I would show if I was having a conversation with somebody about this. I would say this. I'd say, well, what about this? Let's go over to John chapter 5. Starting in verse 25. These are the words of Jesus. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For just as the Father has life in himself, even so he gave to the Son also to have life in himself. And he gave him authority to execute judgment." That's a key phrase right there. "Because he is the Son of Man." Verse 28, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment. This is the words of Jesus. He tells us that there's one resurrection of two different groups. That's the best way to put it. Your Bible, and mine too, at the very beginning of verse 25 has a heading that says two resurrections. I think it's one resurrection for two different people. That's really what it is. When is this going to happen? Well, it's when you hear the voice of the Son of God. Those who hear will live. This is to execute judgment. Why? Because he is the Son of Man. He has the authority in order to carry out this judgment. Those who have done good deeds, you have a resurrection of life. Those who have committed evil deeds, to a resurrection of judgment. That really makes it pretty black and white, doesn't it? You know, the thing is, sometimes you can read that and say, well, I know I've done some evil deeds. Oh, gosh, I don't, But the point is that those who are on the side of Jesus, those who are on in a life committed to Him, they're going to be the ones that see the resurrection of life. Those who are evil, those who are rebellious, those who are in sin, it's a resurrection of judgment. And whenever the Bible uses the word judgment here, it's a resurrection of a decision that has to be made. The thing is the decision has already been made. Those who are in sin will have to face the punishment. All right? That's one place that I would take them to. This is just what the Bible says. Jesus is coming back, and this is it. This is the only time. Now go over to 1 Thessalonians with me. 1 Thessalonians. There are so many. It's really hard to pick just one passage to talk about when we get to this. But this is another one that's good to go to. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Starting in verse 13. Oh my goodness. He covers a lot here. But let's just look at it together. But starting in verse 13, Paul writes, he says, we don't want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep. When the Bible uses the word asleep, he's talking about people who have died. I don't want you to be uninformed about people who have died so that you'll not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. People, usually when someone dies, we have a time period of grieving. But people who have died and are Christians who have hope, we don't have to grieve. Not as much anyway. If you have no hope, then it's a horrible situation. He says, verse 14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, do you believe that? That's the question. This is what I would ask them. Do you believe that Jesus died and rose again? Yes, I do. Even so, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Okay, so if I've died in Jesus, God's going to have me be with him. Verse 15, for this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. If Jesus comes back while we're alive, we're not going to die. You're not going to die. You may be fearing death. Pray for the Lord to come back. You will never die. You don't have to fall asleep. Verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout. That points us right back to what we read back in John 5, where he says, the Son of Man, you'll hear his voice with a shout. I guess it's Jesus saying something. With the voice of the archangel, and with what else? The trumpet of God. You hear something like that, it's time. What's going to happen with that? The dead in Christ will rise first. That's what Paul says. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. It seems like to me that if Jesus was going to come here and reign on earth, then why would I meet him in the air and then he tell me I'm always going to be with the Lord? Wouldn't he give me the more details if it's true that Jesus was going to establish a kingdom in Jerusalem and say, you're all going to go to Jerusalem? If you're going to be with him, then we're all moving to Jerusalem. That would be a detail that we would want to know. Verse 1 of chapter 5. See, there's no chapter breaks in the scriptures, so we just keep reading. He says, now as to the times and the epochs, the periods. He says, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. You see, how quickly does this happen? When the trumpet is sounded, when the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more. Right? Of course, that's just a song we sing, but it's true. Everything stops at that moment. When does this happen? Paul says, as to the time of when this is going to happen, it's like a thief that comes in the night. You don't ever know. A thief doesn't call you up and schedule, hey, are you going to be home? Because I'm looking for a time that you're not going to be home so I can go in there and rob you. It doesn't work like that. He doesn't schedule it. The thief doesn't schedule a time to rob you. And the schedule of the Lord is not for us to know. We don't know it. When it's going to happen. It's just going to happen like a thief in the night. When they're saying, while they're saying peace, safety, hey, everything's fine. And then destruction comes upon them. Suddenly, like labor pains. How fast does this all happen? Suddenly. Whoa, all of a sudden. Man, that's it. But you, brethren, he says, verse 4, are not in darkness that the day would overtake you like a thief. What he's telling us there is, when you're in the dark, you don't know what's around you. You're unaware. So he says, you're not unaware. You are in the light. You understand this. He says, so that day, it doesn't have to overtake you and you're scared because a thief has come in. He says, for you are all sons of light and sons of the day. You have nothing to worry about. I was telling people today in a Bible study that when it comes to the judgment of the Lord and the end of times, if you're a Christian, you have nothing to worry about. Nothing. If you're in rebellion or if you're in sin, even as a Christian, if you're in sin, judgment is something that you look to and you're like, oh, well, I don't want the Lord. I need more time to get things right. And so it's a scary thing for you. He says, I skipped a line. So then let us not sleep as others do. In other words, let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, we're in the know about this. Let's be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet and the hope of salvation. That should point us all the way back to Ephesians chapter 6 and the armor of God. He says, for God did not what does it say? For God did not what is this word? Destined? Oh yeah. For God did not destine us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. What's the outcome for us? We have salvation. Who died for us so that whether we be awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another again. Build one another up as long as you are also doing. These are the words that are comforting to us. that in the times of end, we have nothing to worry about. We're going to be just fine. And that we meet the Lord in the air and we live with Him from that moment on. These are the two passages that I would go to. Now, there's two passages that I want to share with you because they may come back and they may say, well, what about this? The two passages that I would share, go over to with me to Matthew chapter 24. You want to be prepared for this because if they take you to this passage and you're caught off guard, you may be like, oh, I have no idea what that's talking about. But now, after tonight, you'll have a clue. Maybe. Verse 1, it's important to start with verse 1 here. You got to know what's happening. It says, Jesus came out from the temple. They're in Jerusalem, by the way. He came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. You know, they're magnificent. And they're saying, look at this temple. Look at the rebuilding that's happening. See, Rome at that time had poured in a lot of money into Jerusalem to rebuild Jerusalem. It was part of the Roman Empire. And so the temple is being really nice and renovated, and it looks great. And the disciples are saying, look, Jesus, look at this temple. And he says to them, do you not all see these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down. Here it's being renovated, and Jesus says it's going to be torn down. That's what Jesus says. They're rebuilding it. There's not going to be one stone. Verse 3, he says, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when is this going to happen? What will be the sign of your coming? See, they're thinking Jesus is going to come in and he's going to establish this earthly kingdom and he's going to tear down this temple. So when are you going to do this? We're ready to take up arms and for us to fight off all these Romans and their grummy, nasty money and establish this kingdom. When is this happening? When is this end of the age of the Romans? That's what they're asking. And Jesus answered and said to them, see to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name saying, I'm the Christ, and will mislead many. You'll be hearing, and here's this phrase that I can't tell you how many times is just cherry-picked out of this context to warn us about the end of days. Jesus says, you'll hear wars and rumor of wars. Our friends that believe in premillennialism and the rapture will try to scare us with this. Let me ask you this. In the history of mankind, has there not always been some kind of a war going on? Is there not always a rumor of a war happening somewhere on planet Earth? Absolutely there is. Absolutely. Even in times of peace, what we might consider peace, there's war. So what does he say? The next phrase, what does Jesus say about this? His disciples, see to it that you are not afraid. You don't have anything to worry about. For those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. Oh, okay. That's not the end then. This is what I would tell my, if there's wars and rumors of war, that is not the end. He says, for nation will rise against nation. He's talking politically here. And kingdom against kingdom, politically. In various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. It's just the beginning, not the end. What's happening right here? Jesus is predicting the fall of Jerusalem under the hand of the Roman government. Because when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, Jesus was born in 0 AD, right? Crucified in 33 AD. So 37 years after Jesus is talking about this, Jerusalem is destroyed. And not one stone, history tells us this, not one stone of that Jerusalem temple was left without being turned over. Do you know why? The Romans got word that there may be gold hidden in the temple. Money. Money that the government would want to hide. And so they thought, we're going to go and find this money in the temple, and they turned over every stone. Verse 9, Jesus goes on to say, and they, who's the they? It's the nations. It's the Roman government. They will deliver you to tribulation and they will kill you. Did this not happen in history? Did the Romans not bring tribulation upon the Christians? Exactly. He says, you will be hated by all nations because of my name. That's exactly what happened to Christians. Oh, I'm sorry. I hit a button on my thing here. That's exactly what happened to Christians. He says, at that time, many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. You be faithful, even under the face of persecution. This gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom, will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Let me ask you this. Are we still preaching the gospel of the kingdom in all the world to this day? Yes, we are. We're still doing that. And once that is done, whenever the Lord sees fit, that's when the end will come. That's when it happens. We're still in that. Verse 15, I'm going to finish reading this and we'll probably just stop right there. He says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. In other words, notice what Daniel prophesied about this time of tribulation. You'll understand it. He says, then those who are in Judea, they're going to flee to the mountains. And that's exactly what happened. History tells us. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down and get the things that are in his house. You're not going to have time when the Roman government comes in and takes over Jerusalem to go into your house and pack everything up. He says, whoever in the field, he can't come back and get his cloak when the Roman government comes. You're not going to have time for that. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. Why? It's going to be hard on you. That's tough. He says, but pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. That's what he says. Pray for that. When that happens, when you've got to escape from this. He says, then there will be a great tribulation and persecution upon the church, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, or ever will. He says, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. There's only a certain time of how long that tribulation is going to last. God knows what to do right there. He knew what to do. This is all past tense what Jesus is talking about. This is not future events for us. It's past tense. He says, then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or here he is, don't believe him. Hang with me just for a moment. He says, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders to mislead you, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I've told you in advance. You've been warned. So that if they say to you, behold, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. Or behold, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there is where the vultures will gather. All right, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to pick this up next week, and then we'll finish this little discussion up, okay? Hang with me with that. There's still more for us to reveal.